My schooling was standard middle class public school, like any average kid. The first part of my schooling was in southern Florida, and then my family moved to Connecticut and stayed in public schools the entire time. Well, I think that your parents have a lot to do with what you do with your life, and my own parents were incredibly supportive throughout my schooling years. They, although my mother never went to college, she was very bright and witty, and still is, I should say. And my father went to college at Colby College, but never pursued it in a college-related career in a professional sense. But he was very curious and very innovative, and he invented lots of things. And probably more importantly, his hobbies carried over into mine. He was a falconer, and I became a falconer, and I always was fascinated with birds and other kinds of animals, and surprisingly, I became an animal researcher studying birds. In some sense, I've always wanted to be a biologist, although I took a couple of different turns in the course of my career. I was interested in animals from the beginning, but when I went to college, I, like any young college kid interested in biology, I immediately went into the pre-med program. And frankly, I hated the pre-med program. I hated the mentality of competition among the students and the like. I just liked the biology. And because of that, I changed to an English major in college and graduated with an English major. Became a writer and got back into science after that. I was an okay student. I would say that it's more important not to be dumb than it is to be smart. There's a certain minimal amount of intelligence that's required to be a successful scientist, but I would say intense interest and the willingness to do hard work is every bit as important. My area of expertise would be neuroscience, the study of the brain and behavior, and I became interested in neuroscience primarily because of my interests in animal behavior, but also because of my interests in English literature and the analysis of mental health and the like. So I became a neuroscientist originally to study schizophrenia, and it wasn't until after I had become a card-carrying neuroscientist that I began my interests in basic neuroscientific research. So that I would say that my interests have evolved from a basic interest in animal behavior. I would say, again, as with my interests, my desire to become a scholar evolved. I always read. My mother used to say that I read incessantly in order to get out of household chores. And so she would allow me to not weed the garden if I was reading. And so it could be that I became a scholar out of laziness. My purpose in being a scientist came from having a naturally analytical mind, that even in my forays into English literature, my analyses of the literature was fairly ordered. So I would say that I approached even my literary interests with a scientific approach, and I really insist on having real-world evidence for everything that I see and do, and I'm a very skeptical type of person. So I would say that my natural skepticism led my scholarly activity into the area of science. The specific research interests that my laboratory is pursuing right now involves understanding the biological clock of mammals and birds from the molecular level to the cellular level, and how that cellular molecular biology can be translated into animal behavior and physiology. I became interested in that for a couple of reasons. One was that I was interested in mental health as a literature student, and was interested in science from that perspective. And I have to say that I was influenced greatly by some college professors in that light. And then I naturally, because I wanted to become a scientist later on, I went towards a clinical approach, studying schizophrenia. I've published fairly widely in the area of biological clocks research and neuroscience. The current research that is addressing the molecular and cellular integration of complex behavior, I think, will be a very important area, because we are increasingly becoming aware of the fact that the interactions of the of multiple gene products in a very complex way is a major determinant of animal behavior, and furthermore a major determinant in the capacity for certain behavioral traits. One of the things that we're working on right now is a functional genomics approach to biological clocks, in which we can identify some 10,000 genes that are associated with that function. This will be interesting from the biological clock's perspective, but we're developing the technology to analyze these genes in a very rapid way, and I could foresee that the technologies that we and other labs are developing will be used by the medical community in really profound ways. One might be that we'll have a very, very detailed diagnostic tool where a patient might come into his or her physician's office and then give some blood or tissue to analyze the expression of certain genes to see if perhaps you were infected by X virus, or are hypertensive, or have been drinking too much alcohol. And that will be very useful from a clinical perspective. It's going to be very scary and difficult from a socioeconomic perspective, because one can imagine that information getting in the hands of insurance companies and employers might be dangerous. So I would say that the kinds of research that we're doing and others at A&M right now will have really long-reaching consequences. We are, in fact, doing a lot of molecular and genetic analyses. But because my primary interests are in animal behavior, and ultimately those two have to come together, otherwise it's not very interesting, I continue to do some behavioral studies. And one of the things that I've been very interested in is the fact that birds tend to sing certain times of day, and they tend to sing only certain times of year. And so we've been studying the mechanisms by which certain songbirds sing, not necessarily the mechanisms of how they sing, but the mechanisms of when they sing. And we found that there's a gland in the top of the bird's head called the pineal gland that secretes a hormone called melatonin, and we've discovered that that hormone tells the bird when to sing. Maybe what time of day, we don't know that yet, but certainly what time of year. And we're very excited about understanding how birds can time when it's appropriate to sing and when it's not. The other thing that we're studying that I think is generally interesting is many birds, in fact most birds, find their way home with a remarkable accuracy. And it's been known for many, many years that birds will use their internal sense of time, the very thing that my laboratory studies, to remember, if you will, where the sun should be at home. And if the bird is displaced, either via migration or a scientist carrying him away from his coop, that bird will look at the sun where it is and then remember with his biological clock where the sun should be, and using those two pieces of information will actually find its way home. And so my lab is very interested in understanding how that might happen, and we've gotten a couple of clues about how that might happen by, again, looking at this hormone melatonin, which in addition to acting on the song control nuclei in the brain of songbirds, also acts in the bird's visual system and appears to influence the way the bird perceives the sun. So we're studying both bird song and bird navigation, all from trying to work our way through the biological clock. I hope that our research will answer some of the really cool mysteries of animal behavior by understanding the basic mechanisms of those behaviors. But I also hope that the concept that an organism, a bird or a rat or a human being, is integrated at very many different levels, from the basic molecular interactions of molecules and DNA to the interactions of cells to the interactions of systems and on forward, is really one thing. And that by understanding this in a global sense, we really will get to understand health and animal behavior in general. I find research in science rewarding because it's cool and it's fun. And being a scientist is really an incredibly great honor. I sometimes think of myself as a little kid looking at ant piles and seeing what happens if you move a pebble or do whatever, except now I've just happened to have bigger toys. And I have the honor of teaching young scientists and advancing our knowledge of our brain as gravy on top of that. So I think it really is an honor, and it's fun at the same time. Middle school students are really perfect as young scientists because they're at the beginnings of their ability to really read complex material and really be able to use the knowledge that they had gained in previous grades. But at the same time, they still have that real young, innocent curiosity that makes them perfect scientists. I would say that everyone is a scientist in some sense. Everybody is enormously interested in how the world works. And middle school students are probably at the peak at that curiosity. And it's, in some sense, everybody goes through life trying to understand their world. And it's only those relatively few individuals who decide to look at their world and explain their world by looking at physical evidence and putting that evidence together to understand the world at a deeper or more global area. So middle school really is when science starts. Well, I've taught everything from introductory biology to ecology and evolution to advanced courses in physiology and neurobiology to graduate courses in biological clocks and neuroscience. So I've taught at all levels within the framework of university education. And I really like to teach for really two reasons. One is that I think that the process of putting together a lesson plan and a series of lectures and trying to explain a complex scientific issue at a level that your students can understand, and you have to know what level you're looking at, forces you to really reevaluate what you know. And I would have to say that I learned more when I was teaching introductory biology than probably when I was going through introductory biology myself. I suddenly realized that I really didn't know how photosynthesis really worked because most of my work was on animals. And so I learned a tremendous amount, and it really gave me a way for me to learn more. Secondly, I would say that teaching this may surprise you, but most scientists are really focused on their own little deal. And by teaching, one can put their little deal into a broader perspective. And so I think teaching hopefully benefits the students, but it certainly, if taken seriously, teaching benefits the teacher even more so. I don't have a lot of time for hobbies, but if I were to pick hobbies, I would say that I like to read and write other than scientific stuff. And I really enjoy various sports that involve balls. So I play basketball fairly frequently, and I like to play softball in the evening. And then probably the third level of hobby is that I enjoy riding motorcycles and working on motorcycles. And then finally, I have an enormous number of pets. So if that's a hobby, feeding and cleaning 3 horses, 2 dogs, 3 cats, 30 pigeons, an innumerable number of lizards and fish, I guess that would be a hobby. Years ago, you would give the advice that you should, look at books and the like. But these days, middle school kids have so much access to an amazing amount of information that I think that web surfing on the individual subjects is really the best way to do it. So often textbooks are out of date these days because, especially in science, by the time a book comes out, it's already out of date. And a lot of the materials that you see on the web are so well done. Your website is one of them that you can get a lot of information very quickly in a very fun way. The downside of it is that a lot of the web material can be inaccurate. There's no mechanism to editorially or scientifically review any of these pieces of information. But by and large, I'm very impressed at looking at webs, and I think teachers and students alike should be looking at for their own information. That's going to be the new way that people learn things. There may be a need for scientists to communicate their research and their scientific ideas to the public, and that information should be somehow relayed to students in the classroom that are not university classrooms. But I think it's a very special kind of frontline scientist who can communicate at all of those different levels. And so I think it's really more important, although it would be great, there's a chemist in our university, Larry Peck, who goes to schools and shows chemical experiments and is really great at that. But he's a special individual in my opinion. I think it would be more useful for scientists to be much more upfront about talking about their research with the press and being involved in teacher workshops so that they can explain their research to teachers who then are much better equipped to relay that information. I like to talk to kids, but I do know that sometimes when I do go to middle schools, unless I'm talking about aren't birds neat, they'll go, what? So and that's not their fault. That's my fault and my inability to communicate in a way that's appropriate to their age. As a parent and as a teacher and as a scientist, although I encourage using the web for finding information, I also think that it is very important for students to limit their, and for parents and teachers to limit students' constant use of electronic media. Television is worse than the web, but they're all, in some sense, make the information too easy to obtain. And I think old-fashioned reading is probably more important even today than ever, because the ability to use the English or Spanish or Chinese language is always going to be at a premium. And whether you can play with a computer game or write code or develop new hardware won't make any difference if you can't communicate that information to other human beings. So it's very important for everybody to keep reading until they put us out of business, meaning the machines. Let's read.